I'm going to talk today about Ionic Angular versus native mobile development. And I'll just go ahead and get started because the first couple slides are just about me and who I am. So I'm a Georgia Tech alum, go Jackets. Woo! These are my 2 cats and my 2 dogs. You can see them behind the plant over there. Those are my coworkers now. We're actually bringing somebody new on the team this weekend. I somehow convinced my husband to get another cat. Don't know how that actually happened. Let's see. Oh, and then I also am an avid knitter. So this is my knitting machine off to the left-hand side. And you could say that you actually, with a machine, are able to program a row all at once and then move the carriage across and do it all at once. And knitting is a binary operation at its core. So you can either purl a stitch and put the next stitch on the front of the fabric or knit it and put it on the back. And so some people have extrapolated that into Morse code, for example. And I don't know that Morse code is what was used, but there's definitely examples of espionage of using fabrics like this to send coded messages in plain sight. For example, in World War I in Belgium, there were some kind of unassuming elderly women who were asked to just, they lived next to the train yards and were asked to just watch what's going on and like make a purl stitch if they saw a certain type of train car go by, or drop a stitch and like leave a hole, and that would like surreptitiously indicate how many of the enemy's vehicles went by that day. So that's kind of cool. There's and this is an SOS sweater, so it's got like 3 dots, 3 longer stripes, and then 3 dots again. All right, so to the point of the talk today, mobile development. So I talked to a lot of people who, if you're not in the mobile space, you might not really know what's going on or wonder why should I care. And I thought it would be good to look at the numbers of really how big it's gotten. So there are 27 million software developers worldwide, and roughly half of those are mobile developers. Of that half, about 73% are native developers, so quite a bit. And somebody at the conference actually asked me yesterday, so is native development even relevant anymore? Or is hybrid, is web just the way to go now? Is that where we are now? And although there are legitimate applications, of course, for going both directions, it's not the case that native is no longer relevant. Even if you are strictly working on a web page, there's a good chance that you have a mobile audience. 55% of page views from the web are viewed from mobile devices. Mobile applications also do have higher engagement rates. And this was pretty shocking to me that there are 15 billion mobile devices worldwide, which is so much larger than the population of the planet. And actually, the last time I gave a similar talk and quoted this figure, it was only 10 billion in 2019 or 2018. And so it's already increased by 50% since then. And I just wanted to quickly pull up the TOB index if you're not familiar with it. It's one way to rank programming languages. If I can find my cursor, I apologize. Oh, okay. So here they kind of are saying that some of the notable jumps are that Kotlin has risen in popularity. And Kotlin is one of the languages I'll be talking about today. So if you don't know, iOS native is written historically in ObjectiveC and more modernly in Swift, whereas Android is written in Java and more modernly in Kotlin. So you can actually see that Swift is number 13 here on the list. It's a little bit unfair to compare, we've got JavaScript on here and TypeScript further down below. Of course, frameworks are not actually going to show up on this list, but it's still an interesting way to show that, hey, native languages are rising in popularity. Okay. Okay, so native is actually staying very up to date since the 2010s. The Apple and Android have been working on modernizing their languages, and they've actually converged a lot in the features that these languages have. So it would be a lot easier than ever before, say, for a single programmer to work on both native iOS and native Android development. So here's just an example of two code snippets that are very similar. The only difference I notice is like the parentheses and the way that the counters are incremented, but they're nearly the same. They have all of these modern language features that I've listed here. They are both general purpose languages, and that just means that there's no reason they couldn't be used for applications other than mobile. And Kotlin is actually already being used in a lot of places where Java is used because it's 100% compatible with Java. You can just throw in a Kotlin file and it's as if it's the same. And some people might think that because they are newer languages, maybe they wouldn't have as many robust features, but since they do have access to their legacy Objective-C libraries, they have access to all of the extensive Java libraries, many of which have been around since before mobile phones even existed. That's certainly no reason to discount writing a modern mobile application in these modern languages. So quickly, I just want to illustrate how different Objective-C and Java are. If you've never seen Objective-C before, it's unlike anything else I've ever seen. Apple just has to be different in all cases. You'll see like the allocation and initializing statements surrounded with these bracket notation is something I haven't seen anywhere else, which the equivalent would be dot notation, which most people are more familiar with. They have this concept of the minus signs for instance methods and plus signs for class methods. And also pointers, which is something that you don't normally see much anymore in the front end. And of course, Java, which has the more familiar dot notation. So here's just a quick illustration of what I've been talking about, of the interoperability of these native languages with each other. There's a little bit more work to do with Apple, with Swift to Objective-C, but it can be done if you have a legacy project you want to modernize. And so, of course, what we're talking about is hybrid app development. And I've grayed out the other sides, and it looks a lot easier for the developer, right? It looks a lot more manageable if you're going to just worry about this one body of code and let it compile itself out into your two separate mobile applications for you. However, I'll talk further on about some of the issues that I experienced when I tried to do this. Just a quick note that Ionic was first built on AngularJS, and they actually reworked it, and in 2019, as of 2019, it's now built on web components, and you can actually use your framework of choice. So I did really enjoy working on an Ionic application. To back up a little bit, I have a professional experience in all of the native languages that I spoke about, a little bit of professional experience writing an Ionic wrapper around a native SDK, and I'll talk about why that was kind of a mistake. I'm currently doing Angular web development, and I worked on an Ionic project on the side, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And I ultimately decided that it didn't quite fit my project goals, but I still had a lot of fun doing it. But just to talk about how very similar it is to Angular for the web, if you are an Angular developer, it will be extremely familiar to you. It's nearly the same experience. For example, the Ionic command line interface directly calls Angular command line commands for you. It will still template out your HTML and TypeScript files for you and all of that. Let's see. And excuse me again while I'm looking for my cursor. So I was impressed when I embarked on my project that the Ionic documentation is very extensive. It's very, very good. So for example, you can go and see previews of all of the different features you'd want to use and see how they would look both in Android and iOS. Let's see. If you're familiar with Angular, we use a lot of material cards. And this is one example of how the coding structure is exactly the same. It's as if they took the MAT and replaced it with ION for many of these components. So material cards, headers, title bar, the content inside the card structure of the components is, again, the same. And as you can see, they've got code examples for you in all of the different frameworks and even JavaScript. This was something that helped me a lot in my project, is that I actually was working on it with a few friends, and we tried to sort of make it a startup. Of course, that didn't work out, but that's how it goes sometimes. But we had a color scheme that we wanted to implement. And this tool, it's way at the bottom of this color page, and I used it all the time. So I could type in any name of a color, and he had some long and creative ones, like pixelated grass. And I would type it in, and it would fill in all my variable names for me. I can type in any hex value, and it will automatically apply the different shade and tinted values that I would need. And then I would simply copy paste this into my project, add it to my variables CSS file, implement these variables in here, just copy paste it. And what that allowed me to do is, in any of my components that would accept a color, I could pass in my custom color value. I don't know if you can see that. I can pass in my custom color value directly to the component, and it will automatically apply the different shades. And when dark mode is turned on, it will intelligently flip the colors for me. And lastly, the icons, very similar to Angular material icons. Very easy to filter through the different skins of the icons, copy the HTML, and you could paste that directly into your code. So a lot of things that I was concerned might be a barrier for mobile development were actually made very straightforward. So now I want to talk about the case study I mentioned before, choosing the solution before understanding the problem. So I was on a team that chose to make an Ionic Angular application before actually seeing what resources were available to us. So we had native iOS and Android applications that were in need of more robust PDF editing features, such as a customer filling out form fields on a document, signing it, and then needing to flatten it so it can't be edited anymore, stuff like that. And we decided we're going to have an Ionic PDF editing app. And much the same way that certain apps will pop you out to your settings or pop you out to the Photos app, you can actually deep link to any other apps if you have permissions to do so. So they wanted to have this PDF app. Well, as it turns out, there aren't vendors out there that are really selling a solution for PDFs specifically for Ionic Angular. So we ended up having to go purchase the rights to use native SDKs for PDFs. And so they gave us the ObjectiveC solution and the Java solution. So had we found out this information first, the problems, the limitations that we had, and what was available to us, we could have started here and said, okay, we have native SDKs, we have native apps. What we could even do is put them in an interface layer. So I've used the lime green to kind of indicate the SDK and the implementation. We could have our own internal library in the company and at least keep it separate there and let different teams implement it as they see fit. If you really are determined to have an Ionic app, a hybrid app, into the mix, less ideal solution would be to still have this separation of the dependencies and have it in its own library and still have it available to be used either directly by a native app or still wrap it, let the other team go and wrap it in an Ionic wrapper if that is really what they want to do and what makes them happy, but still have the dependency separation. This is what we actually ended up doing. So the only way to utilize the PDF solution that we had paid for was to go pop out and over through deep linking into the Ionic app, which under the covers was using native code to do these complex PDF applications. So these apps were going from native to web to native and back again. Every operation, edit, save, was doing all of these unnecessary operations. Oh yeah, and Cordova got thrown in there too. And so being one of the drawbacks here was that native developers actually had to get pulled in to not only learn Ionic and kind of learn it the wrong way, learn how to use Cordova and learn how to use and work on a native plugin when we could have just been native developers. Okay, so now I want to talk about the personal project that I actually did in Ionic. So even after this experience, I still thought Ionic would be the right solution for a project that I wanted to work on. So I tried to do a startup with a couple of friends of mine. We actually had 2 UX people. We had one person researching, interviewing, one person doing the mock-ups, the designs, one person on the kind of business side of things, and then me as the developer. So I had to ask me, myself, and I, okay, what's the right architecture? This is a huge decision. I spent some time and I really wanted to make the right one. And of course, ultimately, I still don't think I did, but that's just how it goes. So of course, there's the known reasons, and then there's the personal reasons for why you might want to use a certain architecture. And the personal ones can actually be really critical. So the known reasons, of course, are that Angular, any hybrid app, you can write it once. There is excellent documentation, although I'll say Swift has kept up with theirs a lot too and has a lot of tutorials. Oh yeah, it's directly compatible with Angular material. If you're an Angular developer, then it's going to be very familiar for you. Now the personal reasons were that it was my day job. So I thought, oh, if I'm coming into work and working on Angular, I'll learn more that'll enable me to work on my project and vice versa. And I'll be doing Angular all the time and I'll get so good at it that I won't even have any issues and it'll be great. And of course, that's not exactly what happened. This is really the reason that I ended up choosing it, is because I thought it was going to be like the least resistance path forward to actually getting something done and an MVP done as one person. And also it wasn't a hardware intensive app, so that wasn't a consideration. Native, of course, I did have prior experience. If you don't have prior experience, learning Xcode can be a lot because there's a lot of crazy little things you have to do that seem to not be on the internet anywhere. You have less cross-platform issues and surprises, and I bolded this because this is the reason that I wish I changed and did it natively. Of course, there's easier access to testing the local storage, the hardware. Of course, you can test your camera on your laptop camera in Google Chrome and pretend that you're doing the phone camera and stuff like that. But that kind of only goes so far depending on the app you're trying to make. And of course, this was an interesting point that a coworker of mine used to always make when I was on a native team. And I don't have any examples of it, but I thought it was an interesting perspective. And she would always say that Apple and Google, they do have the vested interests in getting people to put out content onto their app stores. And the languages that they're producing are right in line with their business, and that's not going away. Whereas Facebook with React, they could deprecate certain features that maybe aren't important to them, and it wouldn't hurt their bottom line, because ultimately that's not their core business. All right, so I chose an architecture, we got started, we had the honeymoon period, so everything was going great. We were having weekly meetings with Google Meet. Actually, at my bachelorette party, I went off to do a quick meeting, and we met with a startup guy and got all kinds of great advice. We were all planning which boat we were going to buy someday, and doing our interviews and all of those good things. I even got an object relational diagram and all our models and stuff up here. And if they didn't want me to show this to you, they should have made me sign something. So there's a lesson for you. And they even made me make a vision board, and I made the heck out of my vision board. So I was all in until I had some unexpected issues with Ionic. So first is a comparison of what I saw in Chrome and then what I saw when I actually deployed that to my personal phone. So as you can see, my search bar is getting covered up by the time and the battery symbols, and there's the notch on the top of the phone. So responsive design can kind of only help you calibrate so much for those types of things. Whereas in the Xcode editor, it would have a preview including that to help you not kind of design something that's not going to be in a visible area. So this is Chrome versus the phone. This is Chrome versus Chrome. So I had these issues of the view switching back and forth, and I had no idea why. And I was spending a lot of time just, trying to match my mock-ups of I want the header to be in the middle, for example. And as it turns out, this was an issue of a lot of components have their Android display and their iOS display. And if you don't set in the code which one you want it to permanently be, at least for testing, it would change. So it's supposed to match the OS that it's on. So ideally, when it would go onto an Apple device, all of those would render as Apple, but you can choose which one it's going to be. So on my MacBook, but in Chrome, it didn't know what it was going to be all the time, and it would constantly change. And that was a frustrating development experience. And actually, as I grabbed these screenshots, I noticed later that these done buttons, some have shadows and some don't, and I have no idea why. I didn't change them. I took 2 screenshots and it happened that quickly. Now I'm gonna show you dark mode. So this is the light mode for comparison. Here you'll notice these buttons that are closest to me have the different shadings on them. And again, that was a plus for Ionic, that it automatically applied my colors. And then in dark mode, it made the colors richer, and that looked nice. And sure, I could clean this up even a little bit more, but I went to test it on my phone. This is what dark mode looked like on my phone. I had no idea where to start with debugging this. I didn't really want to guess and check and deploy the app to my phone every single time. Dark mode was also not really the point of making a minimum viable product, an MVP, for a startup idea that you think might be good. So that was on the back burner, but it was just frustrating to think that I had that down. Complete failure. Okay, so here is one where side scrolling worked just fine in Chrome, and then I put it on my phone, and it was doing all these wacky moving around. It wasn't staying in its bounding box anymore. This is the issue that actually made me stop working on it, and I wanted to rewrite it in Swift before our team kind of went our separate ways. And I had a lot of issues with local storage. So there's a browser storage plugin for Ionic that is supposed to translate to local storage under the covers, local storage on your mobile device. And for whatever reason, it wasn't working for me in Chrome. And so anytime I would have to refresh the browser, my session information would go away. So for example, if I was a user and I was moving something from in progress to complete, I would send an API call and it would come back, and then it would trigger a refresh because we want to show that the list view has been updated. After that refresh, I couldn't do anything else. From that point forward, it was just completely broken. And this is just me finding the GitHub, error, what do you call it? Hoping that they would fix it at some point. And so I commented on it a year later. I'm still getting emails from this thread, people saying, I tried something else, or maybe they found a way around it, but it's still not working for some people. Surely there is some other way around this that I just didn't figure out, but I did not figure it out. This was also something that I unexpectedly had a lot of trouble with and spent a lot of time trying to work around it without any success. So we had a mock-up that was supposed to have a simple drawer that you could pull up from the bottom. This was really hard to test on a computer because you have to get your mouse just right to pull up on that little black bar. I actually got the animation very nicely, but the gray background wasn't there. And I could not figure out how to make this card go in the foreground and arrange the routing in such a way that I could easily pop it back up or put it back away. And I followed this tutorial, and it just didn't actually work for me. Side note, if you are interested in working on an Ionic application, I really, really recommend checking out this guy's YouTube channel, Simon Grimm. He also has a website called Ion Academy, and he has paid features on there as well. So if you're really serious about it, that was a resource that helped me a ton. It's just this particular tutorial, for some reason, I couldn't ever actually get it to work in reality. That's okay. And so here I just wanted to talk about really quickly how there's not the concept of routing in native development. even if it's under the covers, it's not something you need to learn as a native developer, at least as a beginner. It doesn't really apply to your implementation. And so I didn't know anything about routing when I switched to becoming a web developer. And you more have this concept of storyboards, and you do have the ability to drag and drop items, drag and create the flow from screen to screen by simply dragging an arrow, and suddenly that screen goes to that screen. Here's a more modern view, a screenshot that I took yesterday of what Xcode looks like, and you have your drag and drop items that you can literally put on the screen, resize, done, it's there on the screen. So that is some less code that native requires. This is Android Studio and your view of your XML file and your instant preview on the other side. And this is Swift UI. So this is from 2019. Apple came out with Swift UI, which is even less code. It's a declarative UI framework. So that's just another way that native is staying modern. Okay, so we've talked a lot about there are pros and cons to doing it both in native and in hybrid. Some of the pros of hybrid are reduced code duplication. So sorry, my presenter view went away, so now I'm looking at my slides. You do have a faster time to market. You do have cheaper to market, that's true. And it can be hard to argue in favor of more costs up front when you're trying to convince the people who are having to make those hard decisions. Oh yeah, so Ionic, you can put your mobile app also on the web, and that is also a big pro. That's something that they really wanted to do with the PDF app that I was a part of, and of course they wouldn't have actually been able to put the part that works the native SDK on the web. So that was another kind of mismatch in what we wanted and what we went with. This is also a really interesting pro, is that if your pages are loaded from a server, then your updates, you can push updates without having to make a version update. So having to release a new version, put it on the App Store, and have people download it, you can just instantly push an update. Other pros, of course, are high performance for native. I meant to talk about earlier, so how native is, of course, closer to the actual processing language of the device, and it's going to be a little bit faster. Sometimes it's milliseconds, but that can matter depending on what you're working on. If you're making an app that's a mobile game, or something that's hardware to hardware, like your Apple Watch or your Amazon Alexa, that can matter a little bit more. And security is a big one that I haven't touched on before, but the Apple Keychain and the Android Key Store are very, very secure. And I started using the Apple Keychain as my personal password manager for everything once I learned more about it. I'm so sorry. Okay, so, and this kind of goes along with performance, but just a little bit smoother transitions, threading, gesture recognition, and local storage. So again, all of the issues I had, not necessarily things that prevented people from building amazing hybrid apps or that got their job done, but some of those things were just, if you are familiar with native, it's more straightforward. Hybrid can rely on relies on third-party tools for accessing native features, like the camera and all of that, so you can have plugins that are out of date. Can be slower. This is a big one. It's tough to make the navigational user experience feel natural and feel native. So for example, the Android phone has the built-in back button the iPhone doesn't have, and it can be difficult to use the same code base to address those things, whereas if they're separate, you can kind of address those individually. You could have a need for native developers. No, not necessarily, but it happens, and it happens to me, where you're trying to make things simpler and then you end up making it more complicated if you have any plugins that you need to work on. And of course, the main cons of native are the high upfront cost of development and high time of development. There's, of course, a learning curve to everything, so that's certainly a con, and it's an upfront cost. Okay, so this is my last slide. and I talked really fast, so I got done like 20 minutes faster than when I practiced. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Let me know if you do, or if you want to see pictures of my cat. Oh, yes.
What kind of support did you get or look for when you were experiencing all this Ionic issues during development?
Support, like, from just the online community?
Did you reach out to the Ionic team? And it seems like something they would either know or address.
No, so once I found that there was an issue opened already, I guess I didn't seem to think that there was any other thing to do but wait for them to decide it was an important enough issue. I couldn't find any mention on any community pages or the web tutorials or the YouTube comments of why it worked for some people and not for me. So I think those are things that, some of the things like, oh, I could literally drag and drop and make a modal in native, and I could have been done with this. And instead I was, maybe eventually I could have Googled and found the right answer, but I put a lot of hours into trying to get it right. And certainly didn't figure it out before the whole project kind of fell apart. So. All right. Thank you for coming to my talk.